So first of all, thank you very much for having me here. I'm literally so excited about this whole weekend, getting the opportunity to spend some time with you guys, your setup. Very kindly brought here by Musto, who are one of your sponsors. But I think most of the audience will know who you are.
Yep.
Pretty famous in the sailing world, most successful female Olympic sailor of all time.
For now,
We'll
see.
Yeah, we're in the middle of the Olympics
We
as
are.
we film this, so we'll see what goes on there. But yeah, can you just, first of all, just scene set for a little bit about where we are here? What is this building?
Yeah, for sure. So we are in Barcelona, but we are down the coast a little bit from where all the cup teams kind of have their bases in the main port. So we're down in Badalona at the Norta Swan site here, who happen to have a very large, mostly empty shed. And we kind of teamed up with 3 of the other women's and youth teams. So Artemis from Sweden and American Magic found this huge shed and have kind of made it our home, I guess, for the next 2 or 3 months left.
And the big preparations are going towards the women's AC and the youth AC. So how are preparations going? It's kind of a long road, isn't it?
It's a long road. It's been a long road in the making. I guess to go back a step, you know, when the Women's and Youth Cup got announced after the Tokyo Olympics in 2021, it felt like a huge moment in our sport to go, okay, well, what can we do to kind of try and really build something for the future? And for us, obviously, it was in the UK, where our kind of structure sits. So Ben Ainsley and I sat down and kind of went through what we wanted to do, and that's where the Athena Pathway stemmed from, I guess, was, okay, we've got this amazing opportunity with the Women's and Youth event to really start building something for the next generation and also female sailors, but then also look into the future beyond the Women's and Youth America's Cup to keep that momentum. And I think in our sport, that's something that's really critical, I guess, for that next generation and for female sailors is like, what's the progression, you know, like this amazing event's taking place, what's next? How can we drive that positive step to go further?
Perfect. Like, bring us back right to the start, because what I want to ask about, like, when did you first hear that a Women's America's Cup might be a thing?
Yeah, it wasn't too much before it got announced, to be honest. I knew it was something that, you know, Ben in particular and his team were really passionate about trying to make happen, along with the Kiwis, obviously the defenders. And so, yeah, not too long before it got announced.
And what were those first months like, kind of working out what the setup was going to be, kind of getting sponsors on board, working out, you know, what was the scale of this project? How are those first?
Just so underestimated. You know, my background's Olympic sailing, where there's 2 of us in a boat and a coach and then some amazing support team around us. They're all managed by other people generally. So, you know, very, very different to then running a Women's and Youth America's Cup team where we've got like 25 people on site here the whole time. Shore team, sailing team, performance, commercial, you know, there's so many elements to it, which is like an Olympic campaign, but just scaled up massively. And obviously the risk of sailing these boats, that weighed a lot on me, you know, making sure all the safety stuff we did as well as we could. And yeah, just all the parameters around running a successful campaign. Yeah, I've had amazing support from, you know, Ben and Joe Grinley, his team, and, you know, a lot of the Ineos guys have been incredibly helpful, and we wouldn't be here at all without their support. But yeah, largely we're kind of on our own in Badalona, and it's, yeah, I definitely underestimated what it was going to take, how much money it was going to cost. Yeah, but we're in a good spot.
Yeah. And I guess one of the big possibilities of this, you're used to or have done Olympic sailing before, where it's a very narrow weight range for each boat, but now you're getting the opportunity to race against a whole new fleet of women. Are there any people you've seen on the entry list that you've got your eye on that you're excited to race against who you haven't before?
There's a lot of people I'm excited to race against who I have raced before, you know, particularly on the Italian team. You know, Giulia Conti, just an awesome 470 sailor, then went FX sailing and coaching, and, you know, her journey's been phenomenal, and we always had some amazing battles in the 470. So a lot of that, but also, you know, Artemis, the Swedish team, you know, I think some of their team are at the Olympics now, potentially about to win a medal as we speak in the FX, fingers crossed. and they'll come here and we'll get to race against them. So it's very exciting to race, as you say, like a whole new group of female athletes that I've never had the chance to race before.
One thing I really want to ask you, we've kind of touched on it already, you've been talking about the wider team around you. This is a lot more commercial, professional setup in that kind of Olympic sailing, I think obviously is professional, but it's very self-focused. You can be quite selfish really in how you manage that campaign. How are you managing flipping over something where you carry the weight of people's jobs, safety, that aspect of it kind of relying on you as a bit of a figurehead of the team?
Yeah, it's been the thing that's weighed heavily the most on me, for sure, is particularly that safety element with this type of sailing. But, quite quickly we identified sort of the skills gap, I guess, in our team at the time, and got Chris Draper involved, who's got tons of experience in the America's Cup and this type of program. So brought him in back in October last year, to essentially give us a lot of confidence that we were thinking about all the things that we needed to think about, and putting in place the right procedures and standard operating procedures and all that stuff. So that, I think, alleviated a lot, but also knowing that we've got that support from Ineos Britannia in the background, to sense check stuff, to get advice from, and that's been really integral to us having confidence to get on the water and push the boat and push our skill level.
And I'll be honest, I'm not a big historian of the America's Cup. I'm well into the tech, but honestly, my own journey of the America's Cup is I was a dinghy sailor, and I, kind of the old monohulls, I kind of watched, and I knew there were some big names in it, but that was it. I always saw the Olympics as the thing that I followed. And then since it went foiling, it's really captured my attention. Have you always had an eye on the America's Cup?
No, similar to you actually. I mean, my family weren't a sailing family, so I never grew up sort of hearing about the America's Cup. I didn't even know it was a thing really until probably when I started Olympic sailing, to be honest. And obviously a lot of the older Olympians within the British team were starting to go and do the America's Cup, and I was like, oh, what's this event? And then, really got engaged in 2013 with that cup. And obviously when you know people who are on the boats, that's definitely a moment of, wow, this is something to get involved with and watch. And since then I've been a pretty avid follower of everything America's Cup.
So a little bit of kind of mirroring of history. Women have been involved in the America's Cup. It's not a new team or a new thing. Or the thing that's new here is that it's women's only team and a women's own trophy. But going back in history, Elizabeth Hovey won the cup in 1934 on board Rainbow for the America team, obviously, versus Endeavour, which was an amateur crew. We're going to have a little bit of kind of professional women's sailor versus amateur competition over this weekend, which I'm absolutely dreading. And then, kind of talking a little bit more historically as well, the 1990s. I do actually remember a bit of maiden, and I didn't know, but reading up, I saw Dawn Riley actually went for maiden and had probably actually loads more famous for her time in the America's Cup. Where we are now, do you think it's a watershed moment in women's sport having a women's only competition? Is this the direction we're going? It does feel like after the 90s, it kind of receded a little bit. Where are we in women in the America's Cup?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is a huge step. It really is. I think, we've seen obviously some amazing females who have had experience and won America's Cups, but there's never been that kind of progression to more women getting involved and it being kind of the norm, I guess. And so the gap when it became foiling was just growing consistently with that experience and opportunity of all the male sailors, racing these boats, just getting further and further away. And so the only chance, I think, for us to close that gap was to have a standalone women's event where we're going to have 48 women at the end of this event who've had massive exposure to this type of sailing. And from that, I hope we can build to another Women's America's Cup, and hopefully it becomes something that's just written, that, or it becomes its own standalone thing outside the protocol, who knows. But just so we can get that continuity, I guess, of building, and then hopefully, you'll have a pool of women and some will make that transition, just like from the youth teams to the America's Cup itself.
So for you, it's called Athena Pathway, and obviously for the youth, they will be looking, you know, as they get older and more experienced to go into America's Cup team. But specifically for the women, like, will it always be a pathway, or is this a destination? Could you envisage this being like the end goal and having a, you know?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think a standalone women's event is so important to have continuity. It helps with the commercial fundraising to say, yeah, it's going to be every time there's America's Cup, there's going to be a women's event, and it's going to be in whatever boat. That would massively help, I think, the continuity, and for the next generation of female sailors to be like, that's what I want to do. You know, that's what I aspire to do. And it just gives options. You know, some might want to do Olympic sailing and then do the America's Cup, or some, just like the guys do, you know, some might go straight to the America's Cup or straight to SailGP. So I feel like there's such momentum right now in the sport with all these different high-profile events offering opportunity. The next step is that continuity of events and opportunity, so that the next generation of sailors are like, I'm going to go buy a Wasp, and then I'm going to get a Moth, and then I'm going to sail the ETF 26 or whatever it is, because I want to be a foiling sailor in the America's Cup or SailGP.
What does success look like for you, for Athena, for the Women's America's Cup off the back of this competition? Where would you like to see it sit? How do you create that continuity?
Yeah, I think it's going to be so interesting. Obviously, it massively depends who wins and what they want to do. You know, whether it's the right thing to have the women's and youth solely tied to their protocol in the America's Cup, or whether you could separate it out so that it has that continuity. I don't know. But success for us, obviously, we're gunning to try and do as well as we can in both events, women's and youth. And then post that, the Athena Pathway, depending on who wins and all of that stuff, you know, we're looking to carry on camps with the AC40, wherever that gets based, depending on what Ineos Britannia decide to do. But then we're really focusing on that kind of next generation piece. We have a WASP program set up in the UK, down in Weymouth with the Andrew Simpson Foundation. You know, the whole Athena brand, which is us, SailGP, Emirates GBR, and Ineos Britannia, just launched a apprenticeship program, and we've got Kai Hockley, who's a young sailor from the Greek Academy, Inner City London School, who's an awesome sailor. He's been part of our SailGP shore team. He's now coming for a year-long apprenticeship to touch base with kind of us at Athena Pathway, Ineos Britannia, and SailGP. And so trying to build out programs like that to really start to try and challenge that diversity gap that we've really got in our sport.
Yeah. Well, you referenced the sailors who are out at the important competition of the Olympics, but Kai's out at Cowes Week, isn't he?
Yeah.
Shout out to everyone at Cowes Week.
Enjoy.
That's critical, forget the Olympics.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Wait, I want to ask you what you think should happen.
Yeah, what do I think?
Can I throw it back at you? Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? I love the America's Cup and the format of it, and it's a unique event. Winner stays on, but it is fragile, and in some ways that fragility of the event has made it last a long time, because whilst it doesn't take anything to break it down, it also can be reborn again easily. Whether that's right in this modern age when you're trying to get a sports team off the ground, and part of me when I saw it, the women and youth being linked to it, the youth I kind of get, but the women, I thought this is a cool like leg up and start out. But whether it has to be tied to a protocol, you know, there's no reason. There's a trophy there. Race for it is what I think. Yeah. That's my opinion. I don't get to. I don't have any influence.
It's all just opinions, isn't it? At this point.
Yeah. So we're sat here. Paris Olympics is going on. You've got some sailors out there away from the base. Paris, as well as some great environmental goals, they've also had parity between male and female athletes in terms of numbers attending for the first time. Do you think that should also be a goal for Grand Prix kind of professional sailing?
100%. I think sailing as a sport is one of the only sports where men and women can really compete at the highest level. You know, obviously some roles are physical, and, you know, I don't want to get into that, but to me, largely men are going to be better at those roles. There's probably the exceptions where they're not, but I think you know that is kind of a fact. And then the other roles on the boats now that we're seeing, I don't see a reason why, if you've given experience and opportunity to men and women, then whoever's best on merit should get that. I guess the challenge right now is that opportunity and experience for female athletes hasn't really been there for various reasons. And now with the Women's America's Cup, I think this is such a moment where actually you're going to have women that are getting that opportunity and experience and will be pushing the male sailors for those spots in the boat. So I don't necessarily think it should be mandated as long as we are providing equal opportunity.
I've always personally felt, if I can pitch in on this, that sailing started historically because people can't row boats or move goods around like themselves and their own physical power. Like the very basis of the sport is about harnessing the power in the environment around you. It's not about your individual physicality. It's about using your kind of technology and intuition to harness what's around you and make good use of those resources. And that's what makes it so good for men, women, people of different physicality, and parasport as well. If there's the truest form of sailing, I think it's actually the parasailing, where you're almost completely relying on technology around you to kind of like occupationally get you into and move the boat around. So I think that is a unique thing about our sport, and it's easy to dismiss it and say, oh, we should have big grinders, big physicality, but I think that's a relatively recent thing in the history of sailing. In terms of what can the kind of stakeholders do, so the fans, the sponsors, how should they get involved to make this a reality? What's your ask of them?
I think it's the same as women's football and any women's sport, is just to get behind it, to watch it, to engage with it, to follow the teams, learn about the athletes, talk about the athletes, and just back it, I think. That's it.
Okay, awesome. I think that's a pretty good note to end on. One sneaky last question. Could you give me your predicted, I won't say predicted challenge because you ain't got to say Ineos.
Yeah.
Who will face Ineos in the Challenger finals?
Nice.
That's an easy question.
Oh, who will face Ineos in the Challenger final? I think it will be the Italians.
Italians.
I think so.
Exciting days. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to Muste for bringing me here.
Yeah.
Thank you to Athena for having me, and thank you, Hannah, for a great conversation about the Women's America's Cup.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Cheers.